Welcome to Securing the Future podcast with your hosts, Jesse Metters and Ramin Lameh, where we discuss the latest cutting-edge technologies and how they are affecting the security industry. Join us as we explore the latest advancements and discuss how these innovations are shaping the future of security. With Jesse, a skilled recruiter, and Ramin, a seasoned security leader, this is the show where industry expertise meets in-depth discussions.
Welcome back, everyone, to Securing the Future podcast. We have a really interesting topic today, and we're going to be addressing a lot of you out there that are under PCI compliance. And there has been a lot of apprehension in the market around the changes with PCI 4.0. And so today we have a special guest on the show, Walid Barakat, who's going to be talking a lot about really understanding the changes. He's actually on the PCI board, and I will let him give a chance to go over his background. But as usual, have my trusty co-host, Ramin Lameh. Say hello, Ramin.
What's up, guys?
So we are definitely excited to get into this topic. I think it's going to be very educational and informative to everyone listening. So Walid, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Maybe as a good starting point, you have a great background. We'd love to hear a little bit about your background and also something personal too. We love to kind of get the personal side of our guests as well. So I'll let you kind of give your background to the audience.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in the IT space for 20 years, and it does kind of scare me to say that as time's crept up so quickly here, but have had the opportunity to play a number of different roles with the Global Payments Organization, where I've been essentially the majority of my career. I've been part of QA teams. I've been part of IT delivery teams, data center migrations. I've worked with onshore and offshore teams, and essentially now I have the opportunity to lead the governance, risk, and compliance organization for Global Payments, where PCI compliance is one of our primary functions. In terms of the personal aspects, my time is really consumed. I've got twin 11-year-old boys who have really found a passion in music. So my house is rarely quiet these days. There's typically some loud bashing drums or a trumpet or a piano being banged on. But in terms of my ears, I enjoy that. I enjoy the creative chaos that seems to be percolating from every corner of this house here. So it's kind of fun, unless you're our neighbors, in which case it's not fun.
It's probably not fun.
Well, is it true that you built your sons and yourself a music studio in the middle of the house on the top floor?
I did, but I don't want to insinuate that it is a soundproof studio, as my wife continues to tell me that she can really hear every song or every attempted song that we try to make. So,
yeah, I can't wait to come over for some jam outs.
Absolutely.
Walid and I have worked together for almost 13 years while I was at Global Payments. So we're very familiar with working with each other and just being good friends.
Absolutely. And aside from the friendship, I think that's where the security and compliance partnership really had an opportunity to really blossom. As you develop a personal relationship with team members that you're working with, you tend to understand the challenges that they're dealing with, and you figure out how to adjust what you're doing so that you can ensure that the objectives of what you're trying to meet are also met from their side as well.
Yeah. Plus, we both have a very similar hairstyle, so we had a lot to talk about.
I don't know if maybe we started out with those hairstyles. Maybe it's a testament of our friendship, right? As we've both kind of gone that way.
The question is who copied who, though. That's the key question here.
Yeah.
I
do think I'm breaking ground here on the white hairs, so I do expect that you're going to be following me very soon here with the gray and the white hairs coming in.
Yep. It's been happening, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dive into the topic. Ramin, I think you had the first question for Walid.
Yeah, Wally. So as we thought about how to kind of frame the topic here, really our goal is to make sure we understand what's the new hype, right? That's wrapped around PCI 4.0. Is the hype real? How do you recommend for organizations to be considering their approach to 4.0 versus the 3.2.1 that was in the last year? And really just kind of help us understand in terms of how you approach it and how you recommend companies to approach it. What are the changes? Does this worry you? What would you recommend for people to kind of take as the next step as they look at this big new compliance coming out this year in March? right? What would be your approach towards it?
Yeah, I guess to address the first point there, you mentioned hype, right? I really think that there is a genuine apprehension out there with the introduction of 4.0, and I think it's not unique to 4.0. I think whenever you have a new compliance standard, there's a general fear of what does this mean? How significant are the changes? I've developed a comfort of how to meet the prior standard. How much am I going to have to change? So there's just a natural apprehension with any change. But in this case, it's really the most significant change in probably the better part of a decade, right? The entire standard was rewritten, it was restructured, there were new elements that were introduced in terms of how the requirements are displayed. And there are net new requirements. There are minor changes to existing requirements. There are interpretation updates. There's guidance updates. And again, when you think about the size of the standard, 400 or so pages, with so many different requirements and sub requirements and applicability kind of concerns, right? It's a lot to consume. And when we think about organizations and the objectives that they're trying to meet from a security and compliance posture, it's something that they're also balancing with their day-to-day business objectives, their operational stability, their migrations into the cloud, their business acquisitions, the competition that they're trying to keep up with. So really, where we stand here in 2024, not many organizations are afforded the luxury to have dedicated teams to really look at evolving standards, right? Some of them are typically focused on just dealing with the BAU. So a lot of those folks dealing with the ongoing compliance and security work are also having to play double duty and look ahead, look into the crystal ball and understand what these changes are, plan for them, incorporate them while they're meeting the existing standard. And so just talking about specifically 4.0, what does it mean? I think the council really looked at an opportunity to develop a standard that offered some greater flexibility, right? They realized this was essentially 10 years in the making. The payment space has undergone a significant change in terms of how cards are presented, accepted, transmitted, stored. Are they real? Are they virtual? Are they swiped, pinned, dipped? There's a number of ways to accept payments, and they realized they could not simply be as prescriptive with a rigid standard. So they afforded entities some flexibility to align the controls with what is actually happening in their environment. So in order to take advantage of that flexibility, there is a significant amount of accountability that the entity has to understand in how they process payments and how they secure payments, right? And then ultimately how they demonstrate compliance with those security aspects. The standard itself introduces technically 64 new requirements. They've broken up those new requirements in two groups. The first group becomes effective this year, essentially March 31st, where 13 of those new requirements focuses on roles and responsibilities, ensuring that you've got key members of your organization identified as accountable for executing each of the main 12 requirements. And I think that's a pretty brilliant step by the council, because before you can move into the more technical requirements, which become effective in 2025, you really have to know who are the key players that are accountable for implementing, maintaining, observing, and really controlling those controls, right? So by getting that clear up front, getting it documented and getting that assessed for this year, it really sets organizations up on the path to meet those 2025 requirements, which are, I really think, the more technical requirements that really do take some time and consideration in how do they actually apply for an ongoing operational compliance program.
I think I like the way you kind of capture that, right? So you kind of put it into a phased approach, right? How do you advise companies that are looking at this new standard, knowing it's coming this year, right? If someone came and asked you, Walid, I know 4.0 is coming out. To your point, some of the controls are not being enforced until next year. They're more advisory this year. How would you recommend for them to approach it this year while there's still time to prepare, to go through all that cycle? How would you recommend approaching it?
Yeah, I would say they really need to embrace the entire standard. They really should not limit themselves to looking at the 13 requirements that are effective this year. They really need to, one, confirm that they're secure in how they're going to meet those, meaning they've got it documented, they've got it defined. that they've spoken with those owners so that they understand their accountability. But they really do need to look ahead to the 2025 requirements, right? And really ask, how do we implement it in our environment? Each environment's unique. There's a number of different teams and stakeholders that need to collaborate to make a lot of these controls a reality. And so they really do need to understand, how can we start to meet those 2025 requirements now? Maybe look and review them, ask themselves which of these controls perhaps they may be already meeting, and just collaborate with the QSA, have those conversations with their assessor, and align on interpretation. We believe that we're meeting 10 out of these additional 20 or 30 requirements. Here's what we intend to produce to you, assessor. Are we aligned? Do you need any additional clarification? Just so that you build that trust and that partnership with an assessor. And then you essentially start to build your roadmap. You get the low-hanging fruit out of the way, and you focus in on some of those more challenging controls that apply in your environment. And again, just elaborating a little bit on the assessor relationship, I've had the luxury to develop some really great relationships with our assessors, really in the spirit of transparency, respecting what they're bringing into our organization, realizing that it's a really challenging position to be a third-party assessor, going from company to company, assessing dozens of requirements against sometimes thousands of assets. While we look at them as subject matter experts, they are people, they're not machines, right? And so it's incumbent upon the entity to ensure that you're communicating what your organization does, how you do it, and really what your interpretation of compliance requirements means, right? You can't expect that they're going to interpret it all for you and tell you what to do, right? 4.0 really does introduce a greater sense of accountability to the entity so that there's an expectation for year-round compliance. So again, expanding upon that relationship, building that trust, having open conversations well prior to your assessment gives you the opportunity to reduce the concern and that apprehension, ensure that those low-hanging fruit items are addressed, and that you can collaborate on understanding how to meet the more technical controls that come in 2025.
Yeah. As you talk about technical controls, there's one that really sticks out to me because of the impact it's going to have, right? So the encryption for data at rest requirement, right? Shifting away from perhaps the way it was met in the past with hard drive encryption, where now they're looking for more of an active key management type of approach to it, meaning you can't just simply encrypt your drive once and leave it, right? So you have to have more of a key management, re-encryption type of focus on that, whether you do it at the database level, at an application level. And companies as big as Global Payments or others, that kind of requirement could be a 2-3 year direction where they need to implement this over a period of time while they're operating as business as usual too, right? So some of these changes, to your point, could be a very long implementation time, right? To prepare, to get them ready, make sure they have the right strategy and align that with their QSA ahead of time before they make those decisions and perhaps come up with a miss there. So some of these can be really impactful. And as you brought up, there's a lot of these changes, right? So it's really important to get ahead of them. And I think one thing that you really do well that, I've seen you do hands-on before is you really get that awareness out there, right? You really do a good job of communicating, getting more stakeholders involved. What's been really successful for you to get more people involved early? What are some of the tactics that you use that you recommend people that don't have a lot of staff here, right? Maybe it's one person driving compliance for an organization. What can those companies do to approach it, even though there's a lot of change coming here? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, that's a good call out. Really, compliance cannot be done by one team, a group of individuals, right? The intent of the PCI DSS standard is essentially to ensure that there is clear accountability from all of the teams that apply IT controls, IT governance, that process credit card transactions, but that really go beyond that. Even the folks that aren't directly engaged with cardholder data need to be aware that they play a role in the overall compliance and security posture. And so in terms of what's really helped us be able to meet the ongoing dynamics of a business that's going through change and a new standard has been the foundations of an ongoing compliance program, right? defining how do we meet compliance year to year? How do we stay engaged with the business? How do we understand what are we migrating to? What drives our business? And then how do we ensure that compliance is baked in? Understanding that, taking the accountability from our GRC team and ensuring that we understand that we're in the business of providing card payment services, but then also sharing our subject matter expertise. Here's what the compliance standard is. Here's what our program does. Here's our internal expectations. And then we also support the ongoing training of the internal security assessor program provided by the PCI Council. We, as the GRC team, have been members and ongoing our renewal certifications from year to year, but we also embrace other teams to be part of that as well, from application delivery to information security to change management, network engineering. Really, all of those different roles have a significant impact on compliance. So we encourage them to participate in the training, which affords them the transparency, right? Why are the requirements written as such? What's the intent behind the requirements? And what is the expectation that we as an entity and they as a control owner are expected to maintain on an ongoing basis? That's been really successful. We do realize it's a significant investment of time. And as time gets limited for a number of people, that becomes challenging. So this year, we've actually supplemented that with our own internally hosted training, which we've just rolled out. And so we're looking to even expand that further across the organization.
I think that's great. It reminds me of like a security champions program, right? So very similar, where you're trying to get more stakeholders, educate them, empower them so they can be more accountable. And it's a program at the end of the day, right? So the more people that buy into it, the more the likelihood of success. Absolutely. I love it. I mean, I think that approach helps you do more with less, in those situations.
And you really can't be everywhere at once. And again, the intent of compliance is not just to satisfy an assessor at one point in time. The expectation is that you're applying these controls year round. If you have dozens of new projects and new business opportunities and new service providers and different third parties that you're engaging with, you as the compliance team, so to speak, can't be in every one of those situations or in every one of those conversations. So the better educated those players are, the better that they can consider the impacts and the ramifications of this new business, of this new migration, of this integration, so that they're throwing out the elements of security and compliance controls to consider.
What about smaller organizations? Let's say you're a small fintech and obviously that you hold credit card data at some level and you've had to stay compliant, but you have a small team. What are some of the strategies you think those companies should be thinking about to ensure, like you said, their teams are trained? So like from a training perspective, what are some of the resources that they have access to? What comes in when it comes to maybe even when do you think about hiring a third-party consultant to help you get ready? What are your thoughts, Walid, on that?
Yeah, I would direct small or large entities that are looking for more information on compliance to the PCI Council website. There's a number of documents that they can download directly, including the specific standards themselves. There are high-level training videos that they offer as well, and they do offer opportunities to dive into, like the internal security assessor training program. There are a number of opportunities out there on YouTube and different data elements out there with again, so much excitement around PCI 4.0. There's a number of training opportunities that are afforded out there, quite frankly, for free. I do think that they should start with step one, downloading the standard, looking to start to digest it, looking at some high level training, so that when they do move into the next step of really asking themselves, what does this do to our environment and our current security posture, they've got some level of understanding. At least they have a question, a series of questions of things that they want to get answered. Maybe they don't quite know all the answers, but they have a starting point. From there, I do agree that it does benefit them to work with a third party, a trusted partner, right? That they can establish a relationship with, that they can set some clear expectations. Look, here are the particular areas that I really want to get a hold of. If you came into my environment, how could we partner? What would be the output? Will it be something actionable that I can then look to implement? And again, for entities that have been adhering to compliance previously, They might already have a relationship with an assessor, and hopefully that's something that they can expand upon, where they can look at that as a true partnership. But sometimes there is some apprehension in working with an assessor because, again, they are coming to evaluate you on an annual basis. And maybe you want to look at developing a trusted partnership with other subject matter experts out there.
Yeah, well said.
Walid, in terms of being able to operate a compliance program successfully, how do you tie it to a security program, right? Because a lot of times, especially given my security background, I always say being secure should be compliance is a byproduct of that, right? If you've mapped your controls, your goal isn't to be compliant, it's to be secure. So how do you work with such a large security organization as well to make sure these new controls, they're aligning to wherever it is on the security side? How have you seen success there?
I always really try to drive transparency in the relationships that we have with our stakeholders. I hold our relationship with our information security team in really high regard. I want to ensure that they understand that I'm looking to understand what and how they are implementing their security program so that I can ensure that it's represented to the best extent, so that perhaps one particular security strategy might meet multiple PCI requirements. The better I understand the coverage, the tooling, the processes, the monitoring, the response, the better I can ensure and coach them on how to ensure the appropriate evidence is provided to meet the particular requirements. I want to ensure that, again, well in advance of the assessment, right? We've got these new requirements. We started our conversations with our security team a couple of years ago when the very first drafts of 4.0 came out. And we started sharing our interpretation of what these requirements meant. And so we had open-ended, ongoing conversations, not one time, not quarterly, but monthly, in some cases weekly. Here's what we think this means. What does it do to our current strategy? Do we have the components in place already? Is it simply an update to our processes or just additional evidence that we need to produce, right? But the spirit of transparency, taking the accountability from the compliance side to say, this is what we believe the compliance requirement represents. Where do you feel that you come into play? And then how can we align to an assessor? But building that partnership and letting them know that this is going to be a learning process for everyone. Even with the assessors that we're working with, it's new to them. And I think that's an element that people should understand. The assessors are not going to have a crystal ball to tell you exactly how this applies in your environment. It's going to be a learning process. This is the first time they're going through it. Writing the new report on compliance is going to introduce a lot of new elements. So you need to afford yourself that time and that learning curve, again, with the urgency to start that as soon as possible.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. How much do you think you can automate in terms of compliance, right? So we've talked about like SOC 2 and being able to automate some of those controls so that companies don't feel like it's such a heavy burden every year. They have to manually go collect artifacts, manually go sit down with stakeholders or control owners. How much would you invest in automation versus trying to optimize this process manually? I'm curious to see where you find the balance there.
I think there's a significant opportunity with automation, but I think the first question an entity would have to ask is, what level of consistency and uniformity do they have in their environment? If you've got a variety of technology and discrepancies in how processes are adhered to, then you're going to be chasing your tail in different use cases for automation. It might be in the interest of an entity to try and apply uniformity to controls so that you can then apply automation and then take advantage of that way.
It's a very pragmatic approach.
Yeah, because if you start with a varied set of how you're applying a single control across a number of technologies, eventually you're going to evolve and migrate those solutions into one more uniform solution, right? If you automate on the front end, then you're constantly having to change that automation as you evolve. But if you can get that uniformity up front, you get the best practice there, and then you reduce that level of automation of development need that might be required there.
And do you see that getting easier as more companies move towards the cloud and move towards more, whether it's containers or SaaS or platform as service models? Do you see that becoming easier versus like the legacy infrastructure or data center model, or is it the same?
Again, I think it depends on the entity's ability to move forward into a new technology space and eliminate their old legacy environments. If you go through the journey and you don't fully address some of your legacy infrastructure and you have one leg on-prem and one leg in the cloud, the complexity of your environment has now increased instead of decreased. And so you might be able to apply automation to the cloud, but you're still dealing with manual processes on-prem. So complete and clear execution of executing on a strategy fully is ideal, but really it's challenging for businesses to fully do that. And so unfortunately, compliance and security has to support these businesses as they go through that journey. It's never an overnight success where you're decommissioning and firing something up overnight. So that's where our complexity increases. Again, that partnership with the infrastructure teams, the security teams to say we're all in this together. How are we now going to meet the demands of the business?
Yeah. One more question around PCI 4.0, because I'm curious about this one. Do you think that the new version will meet more of the new emerging technologies understanding better, right? Like I remember trying to apply PCI 3.2.1, for example, to cloud SaaS services and sitting down with a QSA and them just not understanding how that SaaS is being used. What are the controls? What are we liable for in terms of using it versus the entity that's providing the service? Do you think 4.0 does a better job in terms of understanding these more modern technology stacks?
I think it does. I think it places more emphasis on the entity to explain it to the assessor. There are these TRAs, these targeted risk assessments that are expected that the entity perform, right? For a number of requirements, if you're doing customized approach, for the requirements that have a periodic timetable, right? And so if you have something that is new and emerging and different, right? The customized approach offers you the opportunity to go beyond the particular requirement, meet the objective, but explain what your new technology, what your new process, what the risk is, right? Document it. Document how you intend to meet the compliance intent, and then provide it to the assessor. And then that's where that dialogue comes into play. So yeah, absolutely. Again, I don't expect the assessors to have all of the answers though. So the entity has to take accountability to say, we're using this new cutting edge tool, this new technology. Here's what it means to our environment. Here's what it means to the security posture. This is our posture on how we're going to maintain it on a year-round basis.
Do you ever see like generative AI or even AI being able to help make this process more streamlined?
I think there are definitely some of the controls and the requirements. And again, PCI was intended to be a baseline set of security controls, right? There are a number of areas where you can certainly expand upon it, even without AI. But AI, machine learning, behavioral analysis, I think would significantly play into understanding how IT staff members are going about their day-to-day job and identifying those potential anomalies that may detect nefarious behavior, that may detect an outsider, that may detect potentially an insider threat where their behavior is changed out of the norm. And so that's where I think it can certainly address and support some of the traditional forensic methods of logging and alerting, where you have to have trained staff based on defined use cases. Having the AI and the machine learning constantly adapting to understand how your organization works and alerting on those anomalies is a significant opportunity out there.
Yeah. No, this is great. Very educational, I think informative, and you really simplified it, Walid. I really hope this is going to impact those leaders that are up at night worried about how they're going to ensure they address it. And as a reminder, at Tech Compass too, we have that consulting arm for those of you out there that really need a trusted partner like Walid was talking about earlier, Ramin is available for consultations, and that's something we'd be happy to set up a call with you separately, right, to kind of understand your organization and where we can help. But Walid, this was really informative. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here and just educate the audience on what's changing. It was very pragmatic, and hopefully we'll help address those that are a little trepidatious about all of these changes and how they can start taking that first step, right, to make it happen in the next couple of months. So
Absolutely.
thank you again for joining us. Thanks, Ramin.
Thanks, Walid.
Thanks.
Appreciate you
My
very much.
pleasure. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Securing the Future podcast with your hosts, Jesse Metters and Ramin Lamay. If you enjoyed, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a rating.